this presentation about a topic that at least myself don't really like to talk about, financial aspects of restoration and how we can tackle them better.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie. Good afternoon. My name is Aric Bickel. I'm SECORE's Director of Technology and Implementation. Today I'm going to be talking about the cost of larval propagation and to some degree restoration in general. I love the work that I do for SECORE and I'm incredibly inspired by all the folks that I work with. The math portion is not my favorite of this, but what I'm hoping to do is to convince you that this is an integral part of what we need to do as a community and something we should spend some more time on. So there's been a bunch of graphics like this that have been presented throughout the week. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but to say we need to make this order of magnitude jump, if not more. And to do so, we have the capacity to do this right now, but really what we need to do is decrease the amount of time it takes us to do restoration at this scale and specifically decrease that cost to make it fundable. And when we think about cost, if you think about all the presentations you've seen so far and pay attention to the presentations you'll see for the rest of the day, very few organizations are going to talk about exactly what costs are associated with what they're doing. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Part of it is that there's no set standard, right? We do not have a set standard that everybody abides by to communicate these costs, but there's also a lot of a difficulty in calculating these costs and coming up with them. There are, if you're looking at research versus implementation, those are different types of ways that you would cost things out. There are a lot of site-specific differences that make communicating costs and comparing costs across geographies very difficult. If you're calculating it as a factor of success rates are really different between methodologies, between sites, between species, and even between different reefs on the same location. Additionally, I think there's some hesitancy to be completely transparent about costs because there's worry that those numbers are going to be taken out of context and used to critique what you're doing maybe in an unfair manner. However, I would argue that this is where we need to move towards is far more transparency. If we expect to make a lot of headway on costs, we need to be sharing those in a more equitable fashion, in a more open fashion. And there are a lot of ways that you can present costs, and you can tell very different stories based on how you calculate it, what you include, what you don't include, and how you make those calculations. In the interest of transparency, I'm going to present a few examples here of how we are using a framework to create these costs and hopefully make them more transparent. I've had to scale this down to a 5-minute talk, so there are only so many things I can talk about here. If you're interested more in the assumptions, I'm happy to, over a beer later on, to talk through these in great detail with you. But in the 3 tables I'm going to show, I split them out in these 3 ways. So one is pulling the labor out of the cost. And so this will be presented as a cost per outplantable unit. So it's one of these units with corals growing on them that is ready to be outplanted onto the reef, plus a value for a number of person hours that is needed to run through that process. The second is what I'm calling straight cost, which includes those labor costs in the calculation. So that's the whole thing ready to be outplanted. And the third is including that outplanting cost. So that is an outplanted on the reef cost. I'm not showing a factor of success at the moment because it would take me way longer than 5 minutes to explain how we're doing that because there are some caveats. So 3 examples, 2 from Curacao, one with Copophilia natans, one with Acropora palmata, and in Florida with Orbicella falveolata. So a boulder, a brain, and a branch. A few things that I think, looking at this that are pretty interesting to start with. So between Curacao and Florida here, the number of hours needed to do this work is pretty similar across the 2, but that base cost is significantly different. And this is a logistical artifact. In Curacao, they're very lucky to be able to drive to the site and swim out to the reef. In Florida, you can't do that. You have to use a lot more boats and a lot more boat hours, and so that cost is included in that, and you see that represented. Looking between branching and brain coral work, this number of hours is significantly higher, and that is because it's far more difficult to predict with accuracy exactly when these branching corals are going to spawn. And so you have to budget for and you have to plan for a lot more nights in the water, and that increases your labor hours significantly. And you see that represented in that straight cost, but you also see an increase, it's 33 cents for outplanting with the brain. It's 51 here with the branch, and that's because these corals do better if you outplant them in higher energy environments. That takes more time to outplant in that situation. So you can tell really different stories. If I only shared one of these lines with you, only one of these examples, you would get a very different perception of how this goes. And so oftentimes when I give these kind of larger talks, I give a range, right? It's between $5 and $9 per outplantable unit. But there's a lot of detail within that range, and I think we need to move towards being more transparent about how we are calculating this and how we are presenting it. And so when I think about next steps, we're going to be using the framework that we've developed to calculate this in a whole bunch of different places. And we're hopefully to do some historical and current analysis to see how far we've come and where we need to go. But what I'm really interested from, particularly from the folks in this room, is what is valuable to you? Like, we have internal ideas of why this is important, but if we're going to make it transparent, let's make it transparent in a useful manner. So I'm quite interested to hear from you folks here. This may be a peer-reviewed publication, it may be a white paper, but maybe there's a better way of making this available. I would put a quick plug, and maybe there's a role for the CRC here as kind of being an independent arbiter of some of these and collecting them from other folks, because you have a reason to distrust me, right? Like there is some incentive, right, to provide numbers that make something that we're doing look better. And I think that's the case for everyone. Yeah. So I think that's part of the distrust. And so perhaps an independent arbiter would increase trust in that manner. I'm not going to be able to do this justice. We have a billion partners. Thank you to all of them. But this is my contact information. If you hit this QC code, that'll send you to a place where you can contact me directly as well. I'm quite curious about what you think about this, and very happy to get feedback. And I think, as a community, I think more open discussion on this is really important. That's my time, I think. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Aric.
Yeah.
Do we have questions, comments? Yes, Maria.
That was super interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's good to see like a number put into like the efforts themselves and why, understand why.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking for Palmata in the case, even though it's more time investment and more money investment, it's one of our most successful species in the end, and the investment pays off. So it would be exciting to also see the rest of the talk regarding success.
Agreed. And there's a much longer talk and a much longer discussion of this that would be valuable. But even in like outplanting method, right? Like perhaps if your outplanting cost is much higher, for instance, you're securing that substrate as opposed to leaving it unsecured. But if your success is high enough, that washes out, right? Like if your success is good enough, it's worth that investment, right? To do so. And there are a lot of other similar trade-offs to evaluate with this.
Anyone else? One of the interesting thought process that I had a while ago together with Anya was not necessarily just the cost of producing a coral, but the value that it takes over time as it's growing, as it becomes, reproductive and ecologically relevant. So that's something that I don't think anybody is starting, to calculate per, let's say, sexually mature 3 to 10-year-old coral, how they actually gain value, which is like not us spending the money, but them becoming more and more valuable in the environment.
There's some really cool evaluation that our TNC colleagues have done about kind of looking at, like coastal protection value or, kind of some ecosystem services value. But I agree with you, like that multiplier effect of having a reproducing coral, and specifically if one's more resilient or is adding to that genetic diversity of the site, like what's the value of that? I think that's a little more ephemeral, which is I think why a lot of the focus has been on some of those coastal protection things, right? Because that's a little bit of an easier calculation. But I agree with you. I think that would be really great. It's just once you get into those, there are like so many assumptions, right? And you have to and so it's going to take you like an hour to explain how you did it, and what that number actually means. It doesn't mean it's not worth doing, but I think the communication challenge is not insignificant, and I think it scares a lot of people to present that information, right? With some uncertainty there in how best to communicate it.
But eventually being able to tell this coral is now worth, I don't know, $20,000 because it's actually partaking in a pool of reproduction, etc. Then we can actually sell restoration in a better, way, in a financial way. But I recognize it's very challenging to make these calculations.
I think Dave Goko might be working on those kinds of questions.
Okay. Cool.
Okay, well, I think this is
Thanks.
what ends this wonderful session. Thanks, guys, for coming back with Aric.
Yes, thank you.